coming. My name is Laura Roberts, and I'm a member of Bolton's Human Services and Safety Committee here in town. Fred Edling in the back is also a member of the committee, and Pat Bensettler, who couldn't be here tonight, was instrumental in getting the forum started. It was her idea that it spurred it in her survey that she sent out. So we have a great panel here of folks who can talk to us about wildlife and people and confrontations. We're going to start off with our own police chief, Chief Warren Nelson, who will talk a little about confrontations with people first.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me tonight, and thank all the members of the panel for coming out and taking their time to join us for that. When Pat sent me the survey that went out with the last town meeting we had, she came back with quite a list of different scenarios that people may be concerned with. And I'll be very brief because these topics could take hours and hours to discuss. Certainly, I'm available. Anyone at the staff of the Bolton Police Department is available. If anybody wants to go into more detail, please give us a call. I don't think our phones ring enough. We're always around. Somebody can always talk to an officer if somebody is concerned with any one of these. And I look at the top one, which I'm a little surprised that home invasion was the #1 concern. It's probably not going to happen that much in Bolton. I can remember one incident, probably 15, maybe 20 years ago, where when the minimum security prison was over in Lancaster, they had a walk-away, and we had a home invasion. That's probably the only one I can remember that's happened in town. Probably not going to happen, but she also added robbery in there. So a lot of that is, if you're in a situation like that, to be brief, give them whatever they want. Try not to fight them, confront them, just give them what they want. Disengage and call 911. And I think that's probably the best thing I can say out of all of these is you want to disengage, get a good description, always get a license plate, and call 911. Don't pull over to the side of the road and try to engage with somebody that may have just cut you off, or maybe you cut them off and have a road rage incident on the side of the road. It's not good for anybody. Stay in your car, dial 911. It'll only take a few minutes. On a cell phone, 911 goes to the state police. On your landline, it goes direct to the 911 dispatcher in whatever town. So it does take a minute or two to go through the state police if it's a 911 call, and they'll get it to the town and get the officer out there. Bullying is still always a tough one because it still happens in schools. The school system is very aware of that. They try to do a lot of awareness training for the staff and the kids. We don't get involved that much in bullying, only in a case where they need us to talk to somebody. But again, parents can call us at any time to talk about that. Overdoses is a growing problem, not as big in Bolton as you may see in some of the cities, but we have had our occasions where people have overdosed either in town or driving through town. The cruisers do have Narcan, and if you are trained in CPR, which everybody should try to get in a class to know CPR, because that's, other than calling 911, that would be your best bet, is to start CPR on somebody that may not be breathing and have a pulse. And the last one I like is irate sports fans. So in 2 weeks, hopefully there'll be no irate Massachusetts, New England sports fans, and the Patriots, go Pats. And again, people get wound up and they get very excited, and emotions grow very high at sporting events, especially if you have kids in any kind of sports, baseball, soccer, whatever. And it's good to listen, sit back, and disengage from anything that's possibly going to make somebody else more agitated than you might be. So I hope that helps. And again, my staff, I'm available. Please call us anytime. I'm certain I can spend a lot more time going over these subjects in much greater length.
I just have one question.
Yep.
And it is because of the, if I understand it right, non-staffing of the police department. So like in the past, we've had domestic abuse with a restraining order, and I'm always afraid, like if this particular family member say, I just worry about, what if somebody's being pursued and they go to the police
Police
station
station? Oh,
and
sure.
there's nobody there?
Well, the officers, we try to have two officers on duty all the time. When we went to regional dispatch, yes, the dispatchers are no longer there. So what we have is kind of a procedure that if somebody comes in, they pick up the phone. That rings directly down to dispatch. If there's an emergency, the dispatcher can buzz that person through the first door. Okay, gets them into the lobby, gets them out of the vestibule, into the lobby. And then a second layer, they can be buzzed into the elevator hallway, which is another buzz door, which dispatch can control, and that will get them into that. And there, they can jump in the elevator and go up to the second floor and just hide there. So, you know, we do have a plan that we have set up. It's just the town decided, because of emergency medical dispatching, that it would have been more expensive to put 2 people on a shift to keep one person running in that. Because when we get an emergency, when 911 comes in and it's a medical, that dispatcher has to stay on the line with the person that's calling. So I don't know how familiar you were with the dispatch. The one dispatcher would have to tone out the ambulance, call the police, call ALS, call Lifeline, do everything. They can't do that if they're on the line talking to the person that's calling in the emergency. So that was, in very brief, why the town decided to go regional dispatching. And it's been working very well. That's Neshoba Valley Regional Dispatch up in Devens. And it keeps us out on the road a little bit more, and sometimes we have to come in just to obviously talk to people when they do come in.
So there really isn't anyone, though, there at the police station?
Well, it depends on the time. Okay, Monday to Friday, either myself or the lieutenant would be in the station with the administrative assistant.
Okay.
The officers come in regularly, they're in and out, they do shift change at 7:30, 3:30, and 11:30. Dave Farrell is there, Lieutenant Farrell on the fire department, Monday to Friday. But normally, yeah, you could get a day, there's nobody in there on a Saturday afternoon, and there's nobody on the fire.
But Monday through Friday there is?
Yes.
Okay.
But not, you know, it's not that, no. Lorraine would be, that's the administrative assistant, she would probably be upstairs. We could be out on a call, sometimes there could be nobody there. If she goes against the mail, there could be nobody in the station.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone?
Yes. Oh, Frank's got it.
Given all the school shootings that have happened around the country, have we developed any procedures for our schools here? And if so, have you reviewed them to see how adequate they might be?
We've been constantly reviewing those. We've had plans in place for active shooters. Those go back 10-plus years, probably, you know, right around when Columbine happened. Everybody started to get into that. All the officers go to active shooter training. I just was up today, as a matter of fact. I was talking to one of the teachers that's in charge. I think she might be on a nurse, I'm sorry. And she's in charge of the emergency management that goes on up there, setting up policies. And we're talking about seeing if the superintendent will consider the full-blown ALICE program. And that's where there's an alert, and the kids kind of evacuate the school at that point. Now, that's not there. They have a very modified plan, so they usually will do a lockdown or shelter in place if there's an emergency, and then wait for the police to come in. The ALICE program is a little bit more developed, where they have some more distraction and escape from the building to evacuate to another location. So we are working on it. We always do training. We're up there, I'm going to guess 3 to 5 times a year doing drills so that we can have it. And you know, we hope it never happens, but we're pretty much ready. And you got to remember, we've got over 1,000 kids and teachers, everything, you know, cafeteria staff, with 3 people that are going to be on the day shift. So if you think of how big of a project that would be if something ever did happen, the first 3 people go in, find the person. And everything outside is gonna have to wait till we can make sure the scene is safe.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the chief?
Great.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you so much.
I'm sure we'll have another
Yeah,
opportunity if
I know.
anybody else.
So now we're going to move on to the wildlife portion. I know we've seen through social media, posting on Nextdoor and Facebook, lots of pictures lately of wildlife around town, and lots of residents who have expressed some concerns about not knowing what to do and not knowing how to discourage animals from coming through their yard, how to protect their pets, and things like that. So I have a great panel here, and I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves and your role and what you do, and then just give us a little bit of a overview of some of the animals we might see in town and how we can protect ourselves and our property and our own pets, and your thoughts on it's confronting animals, but I think we all know we probably shouldn't confront wildlife. So I'll let you guys take it away, and then we'll have lots of questions, I'm sure. So thank you so much.
Great in order. I'm Mike Morelli. I'm the district biologist or regional biologist. My district encompasses Worcester County, which Bolton is on the fringe of. So I handle day-to-day wildlife and habitat calls and management and stuff. So all the Bolton flats on the west end of town, I oversee the management and all that fun stuff out there. I oversee all the hunting regulations and postings and boundaries and all that type of stuff. And I'm usually the first person to get the call if something does go awry with a bear or a deer or something like that. It starts in our office in West Boylston. So I'm usually the boots on the ground guy doing the day-to-day monotonous, not very cool stuff.
I'm Dave Waddles. I'm the black bear and fur bear biologist with Massachusetts Division of Fish and Wildlife. I'm out of our field headquarters office in Westboro. So I'm responsible for managing black bears as well as 14 fur bear species. So those are your coyotes, bobcats, fox, skunks, raccoons, beavers. So a lot of the species that many of you are interested and concerned about when they're coming through your yards. And so, like Mike said, he is in our West Boylston office. I'm in our Westboro office. If there are issues that people are having in town, you can call either of those offices to get advice regarding those issues. And we can talk more about the specifics of those issues, Esther.
David Wright, I'm an officer with the Mass Environmental Police, assigned to the region that encompasses Bolton. Generally, not only do we enforce all the hunting, fishing, boating laws of Massachusetts, but we respond to a lot of wildlife calls. We get a lot of calls from not only citizens, but some people don't even know to call us. They'll call their local PD, and they'll usually forward it to us. Especially when, if it's something that needs immediate attention outside of weekends, late nights, when they're unable to respond or help. So we deal with a lot of it, everything from bears to raccoons. We work very closely with town ACOs. We give a lot of guidance over the phone if we can. And then sometimes we will respond depending on the nature. Whether it's an injured animal that needs immediate attention, or if it's something where, I'm sure we'll go over things to prevent, animals coming into yards.
I'm Sergeant Lees with the Mass Environmental Police. I'm the one sergeant for the large area, which the region that Dave spoke about covers from Drake down to Marlboro, over to basically the Quabbin and back up to Royalston, and then back along the New Hampshire border to Drake. It's about almost 50 cities and towns. There's only 4 of us covering that region, and at any given time there could be only one person on. So I'm not going to get too into it. Dave covered most of it. The one thing I will say is that generally what you see here is environmental police working with mass wildlife, working with local police, working with state police on whatever issues might arise. There is a bear in town or something like that, and the local police department called us to see if there was something we could do. We'd come and look at the scenario, see what's going on. Is it something the animal needs to be immobilized and moved? Is it something that we can do to just haze the animal out of the area? So we have a LART team. We work together with Mass Wildlife on that. I've worked with both of these individuals from Mass Wildlife. Myself and Officer Wright are both on the LART team as well. It's our large animal response team. And I think we're pretty darn good at it. And we take each scenario we'll look at as we go and see. Sometimes they change as they go, and sometimes the decisions have to change as we go. But most of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight, I think, is fairly simple stuff for how rural Bolton is.
Yeah, so a lot of the reasons that you have wildlife in your backyards and at your homes is really the main driver of that, the main driver of conflict with people is human-associated foods. So wildlife are coming to your yards to obtain foods that we have around our houses. So whether it's bird feeders that are attracting all sorts of wildlife, unsecured garbage, people that feed pets outside, compost, you name it, species like coyotes and bears are going to take advantage of those food sources. So that's what's drawing those animals to be around your houses. So really the simple answer to resolving and not having wildlife near your houses, remove the food sources. Clean up and make sure that none of those sources are available around your house. And now that attractant to draw the wildlife in is no longer there. And then really that has to be not only an individual household, but a neighborhood and community effort. So that's where this is an important opportunity for us to get that message out. If you clean up the food sources on your property, but your neighbor is providing those food sources, you're going to deal with the wildlife that's coming through there as well. So, really that's kind of the simple answer for dealing with a lot of these species. And for some of them, the next step is then when they are there, to haze them, harass the animals. Most of these animals, probably with the exception of bears, will recommend people actually actively hazing the animals out of their house. So if you have a coyote in your yard, go outside, make loud noises, bang pots and pans, blow an air horn, and chase that animal right off your property. So if you've removed the food sources and now you haze the animal, you're really making your place a less attractive place for that animal to be. Like I said, we probably don't recommend that with black bears. With any of these species, it's important to remember they're wild animals and maintain a safe distance from them, treat them with the respect they deserve, but particularly with bears. If the bear's in your yard and it's feeding on something, let it do its thing, let it move on, and remove the food sources after the bear has already moved.
And I will say that a majority of the calls that we've responded to, I know it seems like common sense to keep the food sources out, but that's almost always why, when we respond. It's always a bird feeder, it's always unsecured trash. And like he said, it's a neighborhood issue a lot of the times. But usually that's what happens when we respond to, outside of an animal being injured, if it's just an animal on someone's property, it almost always comes back to a food source.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time talking to people calling our office, talking to individuals who are dealing with these issues. So if you have an animal in your yard that you have questions about, call us. So like Officer Wright was saying, we are there, we're basically available in business hours. So if you call either our the district office or field headquarters, you'll be put in touch with someone who can try to help resolve your problem for you. Like you said, on those off business hours, the environmental police are available for 24/7 issues. We also have a lot of information available on our website. We've got a lot of flyers like this, living with coyotes, living with black bear, living with turkeys, that provide natural history information on one side, but then a lot of those same tips, how to resolve conflict with the various species on the back. So, regardless of the species, if you have conflict with skunks or raccoons, go to our website and then type in living with whatever the species is, and more than likely you're going to find some information there right away that can help answer some of your questions.
I have a question just about, there's some food sources that I feel like can't be, I have chickens, so it's, I often see a coyote that comes through and circles the chicken coop and then moves on. I imagine he probably comes back later at night, but I don't know. We have a lot of people in town who are beekeepers. There's a lot of, I think, homestead type farming and a lot of actual farming going on in Bolton. So do you have an, and I'm sure the longtime farmers have dealt with this for years and are really experienced, but the amateur farmers like myself, do you have any tips for the homestead beekeeper or chicken tender?
Yep.
Chicken keeper.
Well, like the flag in the
Yeah.
back. There are a lot of apples, so there's a lot of food.
Yes,
Right,
all over town.
that's the other thing.
And so apples, for example, are one thing in the fall when the apples are falling off and they're on the ground, clean it up. Don't leave the apples there. That's definitely a meal that coyotes, bear are going to take advantage of. So this is Bolton is along the frontier of our expanding bear range as it's moving east, so you're just now starting to have to deal with bears. People in western Massachusetts know already that in reality you have to use electrical fencing. So if you're a beekeeper, using electrical fencing is essentially an essential tool to prevent conflict with bears. It is really important to have it, to install it properly and well, and to be careful about maintaining it. If you have bears in town, you have beehives, and you don't use electrical fencing, it's really only a matter of time before you will have conflict with bears. So we can provide detailed information in terms of recommendations of how to install that fencing and how to maintain it. So contact one of our offices and you can get that information. Chicken coops, same thing. Electrical fencing bears are learning that chicken coops are another good place to find food. So just like you have your coop to keep the fox or the weasel out, you kind of need to use electrical fencing to keep the bear out. So.
We have a lot of livestock too that,
Yeah.
doesn't have the electric fence.
Right.
We've been chasing deer, for years away from the shrubs in the winter because they're just decimated some years.
Yep.
You guys have, best practices regarding keeping the deer away?
Yep. In reality, part of the consequences that you're dealing with deer is partially contributed due to restrictive hunting policies in town. Town properties aren't open to hunting in Bolton, and I believe it's written permission to hunt on private land. So some of those restrictions limit our ability to manage the deer population in town. So you probably have a higher density than you would in towns that don't have those restrictions in place. So part of it is you've got a lot of deers in town and there's not much you can do about it to some extent. Deer like the plants we keep around our house, they tend to be some tasty plants, and so really the best means of reducing some of that damage is to open up some of the properties for hunting. Reducing localized populations go a long ways to reducing that type of damage.
We tried a new netting this year, which so far has worked perfectly, but
I was going to touch on that. In the short term, mechanical means,
Yeah.
there's all sorts of chemical means, they don't work. If it's hungry enough, it's going to chew right through it, but
Yeah,
mechanical burlap wrap to protect it, it's usually used arborvitaes.
even rhododendrons are.
When they get desperate, rhododendrons,
Yeah.
they can actually get poisoned from eating enough of that. When they get really hungry. But wrapping burlap with that, like I said, that black deer fencing will keep them out on a per diem basis, but long-term population needs to come down because they're coming into the yard because there's not enough food in the natural habitat, so they're getting pushed.
So you guys don't come in and try to cull the population at all? No.
Well, on the hunting thing, I have a question that came up on one of the Facebook discussions. Someone said that in Massachusetts, say you're hunting on land in Bolton because some owners give permission to hunt. And if you wound a deer, you're allowed to pursue it on private property. So could people who don't necessarily want hunters on their land end up with them on their land?
It's a good date question.
Basically, the written landowner permission is a town bylaw. As far as state goes, if somebody is legally hunting with written permission on land and they do wound a deer, and it does, especially during archery season, that happens a lot. We dealt a few times in town. That hunter can track that deer to, most importantly, it's that hunter needs to be able to harvest that animal. Nobody wants a wounded animal going through, he wants that deer and he's entitled to it. especially if the land isn't posted. As far as state law is concerned, they can go onto private property to pick up that deer, tag it properly, and remove it.
So do they have to follow, like my husband said, well, hunters aren't coming on our land because it has to be so many feet from a house, and because of, even though we have woods, but if they're pursuing a deer, can they get around that?
I mean,
I just worry about like somebody being out, like there was that case in New York where somebody's neighbor shot and killed
Yeah,
her.
and that was, nothing about that was legal.
Okay,
You know, there was,
Yeah.
you know, there wasn't, he wasn't legally hunting in the first place.
Oh,
With, I believe, an illegal firearm and at
and
night.
it, yeah. Okay.
You know, that's different. Major majority, 99.9% of the hunters are ethical and law-abiding. You know, they do, you know, like I said, with archery, you know, generally they won't just drop right there. They will run for some distance. Definitely varies, but they are entitled to recover that deer.
So they could go, like if they shot it on my neighbor's property, they could
It
come on.
comes on your property. If your property is not posted, no trespassing or no hunting.
If your property's posted, then that's their notice that they cannot trespass. So
Okay.
the only other option would be to call environmental police, but the law allows us, it provides for us to trespass whether the landowner likes it or not, in the performance of our duties. So we would have to go onto the property and we would say, you're coming because you're dragging the person that harvested the animal. And then we would take the animal off because he has the legal right to it, because landowners don't own the animals. I mean, that's gone on for thousands of years.
So even if it's just wounded but not dead, like if it's running or taking refuge on someone's property?
Yeah, that's a special situation that I've run into specifically before. You know, if the animal's wounded and down, then we would end up having to dispatch that animal to finish it off and then allow the hunter to take it off. Sometimes they get in close to houses where you're too close and you can't discharge a firearm. That happens. Sometimes they run into the road after they've been wounded and are struck by a vehicle. It happens. But if the land isn't posted specifically, then the hunter can go on. There's certain laws they have to follow, the seasons they have to follow. The firearm needs to be unloaded when they get too close to the houses, otherwise they're still in the act of hunting. So they need to unload it when they get close to the houses, things like that, building and use. They have to follow the seasons and the times of day and things like that. And a lot of hunters will call us if they run into a jam with something. It's getting toward the end of the day. They know this buck ran onto somebody's property. We know it's there. And, you know, they'll give us a heads up. It happens pretty often. And then we'll see the next day if we can get over there and take a look at what's going on and see if we can locate that animal for them.
So depending on your property, would you say during hunting season, like, do you have to put like vest on your dogs and things like that?
Well, it definitely helps, absolutely. You know, just because you're not hunting doesn't mean you can't be safe. You're not required to, but it's a good idea. You know, it really is.
When I walk my dog in hunting season, she always has a blaze orange vest on. You know, it's just kind of one of those, you know, why not?
Lately, when I walk my dog at night, I hear a pack of coyotes in the woods very close to my home. Does hazing work if I were to encounter a pack that would come into my yard?
Yeah, you wouldn't want to necessarily initiate a confrontation with a number of animals like that. Again, there's some level of just, you know, use common sense with that and don't approach. The fact that you're walking your dog on a leash should prevent any incident occurring with the dog.
Yeah, but I'm on my property and the dog is not usually leashed.
Right, and so that's, I guess, one of the questions, the original question was how to protect your pets from wildlife. And so coyotes do attack pets in the state. So we highly recommend that you don't let cats outside, whether it's a coyote, a bobcat, a fisher. They all see cats as potential prey items. Coyotes will also see small dogs as potential prey items. So we don't recommend that you just open the door and let those out. You're certainly taking a risk anytime you do that. Larger dogs, coyotes are a territorial animal, and they can see them as competition. So there are instances where dogs, even the size of retrievers and larger dogs, have been attacked by coyotes in kind of a territorial attack. So likewise, we don't recommend that they're left out unsupervised. But if you're out there and you have the animal on a leash, that should be enough to prevent a coyote from attacking your dog. If an attack did happen in those circumstances, that would be something that we would investigate as being an elevated level of aggression compared to normal coyote behavior, whereas preying on cats and small dogs is seen as normal coyote behavior. They can't distinguish that as a domestic animal versus just natural prey. Yep.
If I do a lot of hiking in the woods, what's your advice if I encounter a black bear? I'm with my dog
Yep.
and my husband. What should we do?
So generally it's good, and so dogs can spur aggression in bears because quite often the dogs act aggressively towards the bears. So it's good to kind of, as soon as you see it, start talking in a calm voice to it, and put your hands above your head, make yourself look big, and slowly start to back away. So always face the bear, but slowly start to increase the distance you have between yourself and the bear.
Let's touch on that real quick. Just making noise as you're hiking in general.
Yeah.
Like when I go out, I actually bought one of those bear bells you see how they use out west, hanging on my backpack. I don't even know it's ding-a-linging, barely hear it, but that sends a message ahead that you're coming, and most of the time you'll never see them.
Right, they want to avoid us.
Exactly.
Yep, and that's part of the reason why you talk to it in kind of a calm voice. It lets it know that it's a person, so it kind of, in that it should want to then move away from it.
Okay.
Most encounters people have are surprise. Going out your door to throw your trash out, opening your door to let your dog out, you hit the spotlight, dog's already out, bear is standing there.
Yeah.
That's when surprise is usually when things happen. So we can avoid the surprise component. You're well ahead of the game.
Could you say something about the instance of rabies in wildlife in this area?
Yeah, and so I don't know specifically about this area. We were talking about this earlier, and so there certainly are cases every year or so in town or in an adjacent town. We do have rabies throughout the state. It's not something that is so common that it's occurring all the time, but it certainly can occur in most of these medium-sized mammals that we've been talking about. So fox, coyote, raccoon, skunks, those tend to be a lot of the species that you'll see it in. So if you ever see an animal that's acting very abnormal, and so a lot of times I saw animal X during the day, it must be rabid. Most of these species can be active anytime throughout the day. So seeing a coyote or some of these animals at noon doesn't necessarily mean it's rabid. But if these animals are actively approaching people or looking disoriented, those are animals you definitely want to stay away from. And we highly recommend you call your local police and or us or the environmental police if you're seeing an animal with those kind of symptoms.
Another thing that's common is that people will call our office and I say, sick raccoon, sick skunk, whatever. I'd ask them, how is it acting? First, has anybody touched it or pets touched it? If you just see something sick, just don't touch it. Stay away, call us, call the PD, call the rental police. But I'll ask them, is it acting weird, what time of day, what is it? But most 50-50, I would say, they've either been sprayed by a skunk or stuck by a porcupine. So if there's a raccoon or a skunk out in your backyard flopping around all the day, full of porcupine quills, that's a telltale sign. So if skunk spray or porcupine quills in that animal that's not acting normal is a very strong indication of rabies.
Do you find that, I think lately, well, in the last, I don't know how many years, people use those invisible fences for their pets? Like we had golden retrievers that would just take the shock and go. And we ended up fencing in physically, but I keep seeing like all these missing dogs on, like if you go on Facebook, there's just piles of towns that have missing dogs and lost dogs, and I just wondered, like, do they, is it worse or safer? Which is one safer than the other to protect your pets against wildlife? You know,
So the only reason that electric fence works is because your dog has the collar on. So
Right.
the only thing it does is keep your dog in. It doesn't keep any wildlife from coming into your yard. So there's, might as well be nothing there in terms of that. So that provides no protection for your dog or your cat from wildlife from coming in. So, you know, certainly a physical fence would provide greater protection for animals than would an electric fence, or just, you know, one of the buried cable fences. But, you know, for example, to keep out coyotes, we recommend the fence is at least 6 feet tall, that it's flush and buried into the ground. There's no gaps in the fence that an animal can work through. They can work through a much smaller hole than you would think that an animal of that size could. We even recommend putting a kind of a roller bar along the top of the fence, that if a coyote were to jump up, it kind of gets pulled off and rolls off rather than getting purchased and being able to pull over. You also have to remember that if we have 3 feet of snow on the ground, you only have a 3-foot fence. So, you know, it's not a surefire keep everything out necessarily.
would a coyote say, like I have a Maltese now, would a coyote, I don't put out bird feeders, we don't have our garbage in the back, but like, I have been so paranoid that I've been going out, like every time that dog goes out. Would a coyote like jump, I'd say we have a 6-foot fence, would it jump a 6-foot fence to go after a Maltese if there's nothing else in the yard, or no?
So most of the time when pets are taken, it's kind of an opportunistic thing while the coyote is making its way through its territory. So, you know, a coyote could have a home range that overlaps with half of the town and, you know, part of the next town over. And so as it's moving through the neighborhoods and feeding at someone else's bird feeder or somewhere at, you know, garbage somewhere, then it goes past your backyard, it sees a dog or a cat, it's kind of an opportunistic meal for it. So it certainly could, that's where I was saying it's important as a community level to remove some of these food sources so that coyotes are spending less time in and around town. So, you know, it's certainly possible. We really do recommend that you do supervise your pets.
Okay.
There's no question your fence provides a greater level of protection than if you didn't have it, but, you know, it's definitely not a foolproof scenario.
Thank you.
But if the dog's not on a leash, but I'm with the dog, is the coyote less likely to attack because a human is with the animal?
Right, yes, absolutely.
Okay. So just
But also, you know, it's your proximity. When you have it physically on the leash,
Yeah,
more than
much
likely
closer.
you're very close to it. If it's all the way across the backyard, you know,
Right, okay.
it's possible for an animal to run in there quickly and take it and leave, so.
I see.
I'm curious for, say, bears, coyotes, bobcats, fisher cats, how big their territory is, how far they roam, and then also if there are certain times of year where they are more active in hunting prey and things like that.
Right. So bears in this portion of the state have exceptionally large home ranges. So a bear's home range would occupy 5 or 6 towns anyways, over 200 square kilometers. I should know, but I don't know the exact translation into miles, but very large home ranges. That partially due because they're in lower densities in this portion of the state. Coyotes, bobcats are going to be smaller than that, but still could be, you know, the size of the town or larger. Where you have a lot of resources, animals tend to pack in tighter. So we tend to see higher coyote densities actually in suburban areas because of all the food around people's houses. So they'll have smaller home ranges in those areas. But yeah, no, they're going to use, you know, a good portion of the town or, you know, the entire town in their movements.
What do you recommend to a homeowner that, where beavers have created dams and backed up the water so that it's actually coming on the homeowner's lawns, for example?
Right. So right now is our regulated beaver trapping season in the state. So essentially, you could have a trapper, a licensed trapper, come onto your property and trap the beavers out for you. And so Ideally, that's what we would recommend to do. There's not much you can do to prevent flooding otherwise. If it's flooding your septic system or a well, or it's flooding a road, you can, through the local Board of Health, get an emergency permit that, and then also work with your Conservation Commission that will allow removing the dam or to drain the water away. But that's a temporary solution. You know, if the beaver is still there, they're gonna build the dam right back, it's gonna flood again. And so in reality, you wouldn't wanna remove the dam without also removing the beavers. So trapping the beaver out ends up being the solution there. There are also devices that can be used, and they don't work in every scenario, but basically they help to breach dams. So it would be like a pipe that goes through that allows, even if the beaver builds a dam, allows water to flow through so it doesn't back up. And so there are companies that can come out and help to install one of those. You'd also have to work with your Conservation Commission in order for that to happen.
So I gather it's not legal for me to destroy the dam.
No. No, and so that would be talking with your Conservation Commission. They regulate that
I see.
through, as the arm of the DEP.
Okay.
Is there ever a regulated groundhog trapping season?
Not trapping, so you could, but people can deal with wildlife, so there's,
I mean, it's, I believe it's year-round open for the, for woodchuck.
Woodchuck, yeah.
You know, provided hunting license, and I don't believe there's any restriction on season. And, but most of the time, people deal with them, usually people aren't actively hunting them, you're dealing with them as a problem animal on their land.
Yeah.
If they do, if you do have a problem, animal question, or your local ACO can help, Mass Wildlife and us can, there are certain rights you have as a homeowner as far as protecting your land, and we can guide you into that. I do caution people that go to Home Depot and buy have a heart trap, because those don't come with directions and they don't come with mass law. And that's where a majority of the violations come from. There's strict law on what you can and can't do. I understand, we respect the homeowner's rights, and, we can certainly help you remove an animal yourself, or certainly Mass Wildlife webpage, they have a problem animal control agent list for your area. You can give them a call and they can certainly assist you.
Touching on what Dave just said, one of the biggies with the laws and stuff, if for some reason you have your groundhog, whatever, in your have-a-heart, you cannot re-release it off your property. You can't bring it down in the management area and let it go. That's supposed to be against the
Any
law.
wildlife, skunks, raccoons, things like that, you can't move wildlife because you're just bringing disease, other animals to other areas where the population might be too high, or just giving somebody else your problem.
and that's one of the big things, is essentially you're removing that animal because it's a problem for you. You take it somewhere else and it becomes a problem for someone else.
So if you trap one like that and they have a heart, and it's in the cage, what do? You call you guys, or?
Do not, you have two options as far as trapping a problem animal. You can euthanize it or release it. Release it
Oh, I see.
right on your property.
Yeah.
So generally, if you have like a raccoon getting into your shed, you could trap it, plug up the hole where it came from, and then release it. Otherwise, you have those two options. Don't call us and say, I was trying to trap a woodchuck and I got a skunk. Come help me. It's not how it
Come
works.
by with a sandwich, I'll come watch you.
But you have to remember, once you set that trap, you're now a trapper in Massachusetts. Trapping law is now applied to you.
Traps have to be checked every 24 hours.
And if you ever have any questions, certainly give us a call, because we've certainly dealt with it, and certainly dealt with it at our own homes.
This might be a police, because we don't have our Bolton animal control person isn't here, right?
Not here tonight.
Yeah. So what should people do? Like, I helped a little bit with a dumped dog in Bolton, where someone saw it actually being dumped out of a car, and the police were involved, and MSPCA took it and found a home for it. But so many times, like, people will say, you know, on Nextdoor or wherever, like, they're missing cats or they're missing dogs, or they'll come across a dog and you don't know if it belongs there or it's dumped or stray or what. So should people call? Like, if you see a dog, you're out walking and there's a dog walking down 117 or down Quaker Lane, what should we do?
Sure. There is kind of a leash law in town. You know, obviously the dogs can't be a nuisance, and the dog walking on 117 is a nuisance.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be happening. So, yes, you can call dispatch. We'll send an officer down, and then we'll get the animal control out to see if we can track down the dog. And sometimes Susan can identify him, just either by a description, or if she comes out, she may have run into the dog before.
Okay.
But, yeah, I would say just call dispatch would be your best bet. Tell them the situation. Every time you see a dog, it might be a neighborhood dog. Obviously, if it doesn't look right, give us a call and we'll come down and check it out.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, we have a cul-de-sac which encompasses approximately 12, maybe 14 acres. Love to cull the deer, except I have a neighbor who's worried that their daughter might see a deer bleeding. I have counted with the thermal imager bedding downs of 18 animals in that area, and it's surrounded by swamps, so they're not going anywhere, and there's plenty of natural food for them. The number of coyotes and fox that have increased in the area is up 4 times what it was when we first moved in 18 years ago. How do I explain to the neighbors that the situation's going to get worse, not better?
That's a very good question. It's very difficult to convince people who have different opinions about wildlife and what should be done to necessarily change their minds with what they want done on their property or what have you. So it's definitely a challenge there to convince everyone to agree to potentially reducing the populations of some of these animals. Some people just aren't going to agree with you necessarily. So, but if you have the ability on your property to hunt or have people there to hunt, then yeah, we would highly recommend that you do so.
So you don't think like the coyote and other wildlife can keep the deer population under control?
No, excuse me, no. Coyote do take some deer, but they really don't have an impact on population. Some of the places where we have the highest coyote densities in the state, we also have extremely high deer densities. Really the only means of really checking the deer population is through hunting.
And would you want to check it? I mean, I don't know how to say this. Well, I grew up with, and my husband was a hunter, and I grew up around it. But I just am curious, like, would there be enough, say, in an area like Bolton or Harvard, enough food sources that deer could survive? Or like in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, you see starving deer if it's not taken care of. So would you be calling them because you don't want them to starve, or because you don't want them to eat your shrubs?
I can run with that one if you want.
Sure.
Well, I can say from my experience, it's actually those weak deer that aren't getting enough food that's feeding the coyotes and the foxes.
And then
The
throwing
natural
them.
Because I found carcasses, I mean, unless you knew what you were looking at, you wouldn't know that they were deer anymore, but yeah, they're well fed.
The way the town's set up now, that you can hold a tremendous amount of deer. You have all the lawns, all the orchards and whatnot. It's not necessarily, as you're getting more eastern, Bolton is on the fringe, like David said, but the further east you get, the environmental capacity is there to carry deer, but the cultural capacity is not there. The people,
So what does that mean?
that means that people won't tolerate that many deer. Some people will, some people won't, but it's nice seeing them in the farmer's field and whatnot, but when they start tearing your bushes apart, your $10,000 landscape apart, I get these calls all the time. that's when we've kind of dubbed it cultural carrying capacity. You know, we say, well, science says this property can hold 18 deer per square mile, give or take. People want to see 6. That's what they're happy with. That's what they're, less ticks. They're not getting their landscape tore up. People aren't hitting with cars. So it's trying to find that balance. The environment can support them. That's why they're everywhere, and they're heading east. But it's trying to find that balance with the people. So culturally, we need. Nature doesn't know when to stop, and she does when they start starving, disease. You'll see increases in coyotes population, things like that directly linked to the deer, but where humans have kind of gotten their fingers into everything, we need to try to get that balance reset and bring it back down so that culturally we'll be okay, and then the environment also benefits. We do have areas like the Blue Hills, some of you probably heard of that, towards Boston, where people like the deer. It's the complete opposite, but the environment was getting severely impacted. There was no regrowth of trees, people's lawns were getting destroyed, the forest was basically deteriorating, and we had done different samplings and whatnot to prove that. So they actually, through DCR and a whole bunch of town meetings and whatnot in that general area, we've actually started controlled hunting of the deer to try to reduce those numbers, to protect the environment and bring them into what people will accept. Reduce car crashes, reduce ticks, reduce damage, basically. So I guess to answer your question, Bolton can support a lot more deer than are here, but it's whether people will tolerate that many deer, and they won't. You'll start getting more car crashes, you'll get more damage, basically.
Well, on the car crash thing, so what is, because I've seen and heard discussion on this too, what is the right thing to do? Because like I always brake, and we grew up learning that deer are mesmerized by headlights, so if you turn the lights off, it frees them to run. But other people say you're not supposed to brake, that you just take your foot off the gas and hit them. And I mean,
Having hit
had
several deer
close.
myself,
Yeah, I brake.
I had about 1/10 of a quarter of a fifth of a second to make a decision. The deer have a tendency, for whatever reason, to decide to run right in front of you. If you've never hit one, you don't have that time to think about it. You're gonna hit them or you're not. There's not much.
Well, like I've had them come out, but I've always been, maybe
But you
because I
had
go
enough
slow on
Exactly.
these roads because I know
If they're
there
gonna come
are
out in
deer
front of you,
around.
they're gonna come out in front of you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I don't think we'd recommend turning your lights off.
No, no.
Somebody else might hit you.
There's not enough, yeah, if you see it, if you have enough time to see it and think about turning the lights off, you have enough time to stop or avoid it.
Okay.
Usually you can see their eyes glowing off to the side. You'll never
Yes,
see the body,
yeah.
but you'll see.
You-
I don't know if you
yes.
guys would agree.
Yeah,
Come across that many.
I'm on the road an awful lot, and you see, if you ever see a deer, even in the distance that crosses the road 100 yards in front of you, it's still a good idea to slow down, because what's the possibility that there's 1 or 2 or 3 right behind it,
yes.
skipping along, following them?
Every time it's
It happens to
happened.
me more often than
Yeah.
not. So if you see a deer, even though you think it's safe
There's
to mix
more.
it, bring it way down and really bring your attention up and watch both sides of the road, because it's quite likely there's more deer in the area.
Okay.
And to elaborate on that subject just a little bit more, if a deer is struck and killed, that anybody in that car, driver has right of first refusal to actually salvage that deer. A lot of people do. And if that happens, you can give them a call and they'll put an official seal on it, or you come to either one of our offices, we'll do the same thing. We take a little bit of data from it, and you're welcome to salvage whatever's left for meat. And a lot of people do that.
So you have to do it though in a certain amount of time, right?
It depends on the weather. You have, if it was hit tonight, you'd have a little bit longer than if it was hit when it was 65 degrees out. That's all. There's meat, basically. But if you do hit a deer, and you know someone that hunts or whatnot may be interested in it, and you want to salvage, you could do that.
But you would have to contact.
Yeah, you can't just drag it home
Okay.
because we want the data from the car
You have
strike.
to wait till you guys show up and then.
No, sometimes these guys will come to you,
Okay.
or you can come, West Boylston's not that far, you can
Okay.
bring it down that night or
Okay.
that evening or the next morning, and we'll get a quick little bit of biological data from it, throw a little seal on it, and you're good to
Or
go.
if you know somebody that would be interested in it, they can.
Technically, the way the law is written, no,
Oh, okay.
but it's the discretion, you know, rather than waste it.
Right.
A lot of times, these guys will just let it, you know, if it's on the up and up, I'll just let it
We
get done.
usually just want to lay eyes on it, or something happens and the local police shows up, the deer's wounded, the local police puts it down, the person that struck it wants it. They'll make a quick log that it occurred, so then you call us and say this happened in the town of Bolton last night. You know, okay, they have your info, they made a call, then we'll call the police department, confirm that that's exactly how it happened, and then we'll call you back and we'll either come give you a deer seal for it and a piece of paper, it's mortality slip, so that you can legally possess that animal.
Is there does anything work, like deer whistles on your car or anything at all work to keep them from your car?
Just drive carefully.
No, they don't work.
My dad used to swear by these deer whistles that you mount on the car, like on the bumper, and he said that it makes a high-pitched sound that keeps the deer away, but I don't know if it really
I don't think there's much science behind that. If you ever heard a car, if you're ever in the woods at night per se, and you just hear a highway, you can hear it for miles. So they know it's there, but it's just part of the background noise to them. And like I said, for whatever reason, they like to run out as soon as they see the headlights. I don't know why.
Yeah, don't waste your money. They don't work.
What controls the coyote population?
To some extent, not much. You know, particularly again in towns like this where, you know, there's almost no hunting pressure. But coyote are also a very difficult species to control their population. Biologically, if there's higher levels of mortality, they produce more pups. So they respond very quickly to hunting pressure, mortality pressure. As long as the resources are there, they are going to produce pups. And so, you know, that's why we talk a lot with people about learning to live with coyotes, because in reality, they're not going anywhere. You know, we're going to have coyotes on the landscape. And so it's learning to take those precautions around your house to live and peacefully coexist with them is really the best option.
Actually, I went to a talk once with a woman, she lives up in New Hampshire, but she's been studying coyotes and wolves for years, and she was saying that actually hunting coyotes actually helps increase their population. That they, you know, the coyotes that used to be just out west, and they, you know, people would just hunt them, and it would increase the population because their breeding is very restricted in their pack. There's just usually this one mating pair, and if you happen to kill one, like the mating pair, then all of them, then it's open season for them just to mate with, and that's why it creates like a population boom.
But they're still going to be limited by the resources that are available, so that the population is only
so they actually
so high dependent, so they could disperse.
So I don't think originally like this area never had coyotes. They were probably when the Europeans first came here, they probably were just wolves.
Right.
And the coyotes were out, in the out west, and so now they're just.
So that's a function of primarily two things. Essentially, we did have wolves here, and where wolves and coyotes coexist, wolves will persecute coyotes, and so they're the dominant animal. So that's probably the main reason we never had coyotes here. But also, coyotes were always a grassland species. So wolves were eliminated throughout the East in colonial times, but we also opened up all the eastern forests to farmland. So now the grassland species that was coyote moved through now suitable habitat and expanded into that void. So it was now good habitat for them because it was open farmland, but also you didn't have the competitor of the wolves there. So essentially they just filled a natural hole in the ecosystem. So they kind of naturally recolonized this area as a result of it.
Is there any evidence of coyote and wolf-like hybrid or whatever in this area?
The coy wolf?
Yeah, the coy wolf, yeah. Is that myth
Every
or
coyote
true?
we have in Massachusetts has wolf DNA in it. And it also has domestic dog DNA in it. It's not a new phenomenon. The term coy wolf is it's essentially like calling a couch a sofa or a tissue a Kleenex or something. It's just another name for it. That as they expanded from the west, they mated with, so essentially you had dispersing coyotes, so there was only a few on the landscapes, and you had a few wolves in the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes. With those few animals on the landscape, they actually mated together at that point. So that introduction of wolf DNA and also domestic dog DNA came when they were expanding east. So as long as we've had coyotes in Massachusetts, they've always had this small amount of wolf DNA in them as well.
So like a bigger coyote would just be like
Yeah,
a
when it's just
bigger
a coyote, it's just a bigger coyote. So
Okay.
like I said, every single animal has that DNA in it. And they are larger than western coyotes. So they're, our average coyote size is probably 35 to 40 pounds. They're definitely a smaller animal out where it's just coyotes in the west, for sure.
A very healthy coyote in this area, all, big male, beautiful coat, will look 60 or 70 pounds if you don't know what you're looking at. It'll look bigger than a German Shepherd. But it's
So a lot of
actually
that is that winter
big,
coat
big,
that's
fluffy
fluffed
coat.
up, and if you remove that hair, it's a much smaller animal than it looks like.
I actually had a question. I get a lot of calls about proper posting of property. So sort of back to the beginning question. I didn't know, I guess I've read a lot of mixed things, heard a lot of mixed things, been taught a lot of mixed things. So what is the proper way to post?
As far as
property?
posting it, like
Yeah.
no hunting?
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple different laws you can look at, like the posting no trespassing. I'm not gonna get into that. We'll talk about hunting,
Yeah.
because you wanna keep hunters out. You can post it, no hunting on your property. The law just says that it needs to be conspicuously posted, which just means obvious. And when we're dealing with hunters and interactions with homeowners on posted property, if I walk up on the property and I can tell it's no hunting, then I expect a hunter to know that.
Right.
But, certainly I've seen it all online in the discussions, that it's supposed to be every 50 feet, 10 feet up. As far as no hunting, the law says nothing about that. Just needs to be conspicuously posted. I personally, if that's what you want, I recommend, as many signs as you can put out there. You can get them pretty cheaply at Home Depot, and at least the corners, so that, somebody a hunter that's walking through the woods, if he comes up on your land and he sees a no hunting, he should be turning around. But if you only have one side posted and he walks through, you have to be reasonable. But that's what the law says, just conspicuously posted.
Thank you.
More questions? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. This was a wonderful discussion, and I think we got a lot of our questions answered tonight. They have some flyers up here, some pamphlets about living with wildlife on your property that you can grab on your way out, and I'll take some to bring to town hall, or you can take some to bring to town hall. Yeah, that would be great. So thank you, and it's filmed, so you can tell your friends to watch it on Bolton Access TV as well. Thanks for coming, and thanks to all of our panelists for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Like suburban Pittsburgh original.